Hello and welcome to the In Publishing podcast. Our guest this week is Mark Allen, chairman and proprietor of family-run publishing company, the Mark Allen Group, whose brands cover healthcare, business, engineering, music and leisure. We would like to thank our podcast sponsor, Acorn Web Offset, the Yorkshire-based specialist A5 and A4 magazine printer. With high-speed web offset and sheet-fed printing, together with in-house saddle stitching, perfect binding and mailing services, Acorn can cope with the most demanding of production turnarounds. Acorn prides itself on its efficiency and low-cost print production. For more information, visit acornweb.co.uk. Mark Allen is the chairman of Mark Allen Publishing, a highly successful family-run company that publishes 75 titles spanning healthcare, education, business, manufacturing and engineering, music and leisure. Mark, welcome to the In Publishing podcast.
Thank you very much indeed, Ciar. Delighted to be on your show.
So, how would you characterise the Mark Allen Group? I've just given a taste there of the many different areas in which you publish. But if you could sort of sum up the group, how would you do that?
Well, Ciar, I think there are 4 words that sum up my group. 3 of them begin with the letter S and 1 with D. But the 3 words that I would use, first of all, are substance, success, and significance. And if I take them in order, substance, we have, in fact, not 100 magazines, not 75, 100 magazines in 12 different sectors. And in a normal non-COVID-19 year, we would organize around 250 exhibitions, awards, and events. So I think we can tick that box. Success, with a turnover of more than £50 million, our profits are well above the industry average, and we have been listed on several times on the Sunday Times Fast Track as one of the fastest growing companies in the country. And significance, we are a family company with a can-do participatory culture. Personally, I'm not particularly interested in people's qualifications. I'm above all interested in what they can do, whether they have the right drive and the determination to do well. So in my company, there is little bureaucracy. I think we are very flexible as an organization. We can make decisions very quickly, and we don't have a stultifying corporate ethos. And I think all these factors make us, and this is the D word, distinctive. I'd like to believe anyway, that we are different from most other publishing and media companies. And I believe that these are the reasons why I've become possibly the most successful family-based company to have emerged in the last 40 years.
So when the pandemic struck, I understand that you wrote 3 different budget plans, which perhaps feeds into what you've just been talking about being able to react quickly. Can you talk us through the thinking and how your company has coped during this period?
Yes, a very, very good question, Ciar. Way back in March, the world looked extremely gloomy and dark and on the brink of collapse as the pandemic started to bite. And it was very hard to get any clarity about how the future would pan out. So we decided to write 3 different budget scenarios, what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly. The most alarming issue facing us, as indeed a lot of other companies, was events. We've had to cancel a vast number of events. Indeed, we've not been able to run a single live event since March. And so that factor alone created a black hole in our accounts. And as a result, our cash position looked really problematic. And on the worst case scenario, it seemed that we would start running out of cash in the autumn. However, despite not being able to hold any live events since March, the company has coped incredibly well. Indeed, after 6 months, we are 3.1 million better on our EBITDA profitability than our best case budget scenario. And ironically, we have more cash in the till than in all the 35 preceding years that the company has been in existence. However, I don't want to sound at all complacent, because there are some huge caveats. The job creation scheme comes to an end at the end of this month, and so there's a lot of lack of clarity about what's going to be happening into events. And we were actually hoping to kickstart some events in the last quarter of this year, but live events, but that's not going to happen. So, and we also have some obligations to meet. So we need to hang on to every penny of the cash which we have accumulated since March. So, although we've done very well so far, we're certainly not out of the woods.
Well, I'll come back to events a bit later, but looking at the positives, while some publishers have struggled, Mark Allen Group has, as you say, done rather well. Can you give some of the reasons for that? And from your experience, what advice and insights would you give to fellow publishers looking to get through this time?
Well, Ciar, I think there are three main reasons why we've been performing better than the majority of publishing and events companies. Firstly, we have a very diverse portfolio. As I said before, we're in 12 different market sectors. In the past, I think we've sometimes been accused of having too many fingers in too many pies, but I believe it's the range of our portfolio and the different revenue streams that we have created that have been incredibly helpful us at this time. Secondly, the acquisition of Farmers Weekly, which we completed at the end of last year, has proved a very fortunate masterstroke because Farmers Weekly is a wonderful business, one of the most iconic brands in publishing. It's by far and away our most profitable brand, and it's been barely affected by the pandemic. And thirdly, the third reason is that we have got a superb and focused team, led by my son Ben Allen as the chief executive officer, and how the senior management have performed. Indeed, the whole of our team, as how they performed, has been absolutely extraordinary. They've demonstrated incredible kind of creativity and ingenuity, and I think that can-do spirit has been, very, very prevalent. So you actually asked me what advice I would give to other publishers. Well, the main advice is cash. Cash is king, and you need to safeguard cash with your life. But you also need to be very positive and creative. And I think you need to very carefully kind of watch all your expenditure. When markets are against you, there is only so much you can do. You can't really kind of counteract the market trends. You can be very creative, but as I say, you can't buck the markets, but you can do an awful lot to cut costs without, and this is the crucial factor, without downgrading on quality. And that is what I think we've done with a great deal of success.
Very, very interesting. Now, despite having lots of other things on your plate, during lockdown, you also found time to write a novel. Can you tell us how that came about and what the novel is about and what inspired you to write it?
Well, thanks for the question. the story has been a long time in gestation, and I first started writing it 5-6 years ago, and I took myself off to France, took week breaks to write it, and it's a novel. It's heavy on fiction, but it's one in which it follows to some extent the trajectory of my own life, and some of the book has been both cathartic and also painful. Um, so when I first wrote the book in France many years ago, I didn't actually write it as necessarily for publication. I wrote it because I wanted to tell this own story that I had been bubbling up in my brain for many years, based on, to some extent, some of my own knowledge and experience, although it's totally a work of fiction. But as a journalist, I also wanted to prove to myself that I could have the stamina and the skill to sustain the writing of a book of more than 100,000 words. I've written many articles as a journalist, but nothing very much more than about 1,500 words. So, that was the requirement for me. I wanted to see whether I could write a novel. When I'd finished writing the book, I showed it to one or two kind of literary friends, and they were impressed with it, and they persuaded me that I should try to publish it. And around less than 2 years ago, I wasn't going to publish it myself because although we have a book publishing operation, and I have published a couple of novels, it's not a vanity operation. If I was going to have it published, and as I say, my prime reason was to prove to myself that I could write a novel. But if I was going to have it published, I wanted it to have authentication from a third party. So less than 2 years ago, I showed it to my current publisher, a really remarkable person called Dr. Anthony Hurst, a former academic who a few years ago started his own publishing company called Cadenzo Books. And I showed it to him, and he really liked the book. But he suggested very wisely, as it turns out, that the book needed to be written in the first person rather than the third person as I'd originally written it. And instead of dipping in and out of time as I had done, he suggested that the story had to be told chronologically. And it was remarkably good advice. But at the time, I was very, very busy, helping to run the company. And I thought, I don't have the energy or the time to do it. So once again, I just put the book into deep storage. And then earlier on this year, in about April this year, during lockdown, I've always written quite a lot of poetry, and I wrote a poem about lockdown, which I sent to Anthony, my publisher, and he liked the poem, and he's going to publish that in a kind of a anthology of poems, I think, next year. But at that stage, he said, "Well, what's happened to your book? You really should rewrite the book." And I thought, well, if I am going to rewrite it, I'm in lockdown. I have one perhaps golden opportunity of rewriting it, and that was now. So I decided to take the plunge.
And how did you manage to fit in the writing while still running your business? And did it have any impact on your business? I mean, did it in some ways give you some extra enthusiasm?
Very good question. It was, really very difficult to rewrite the book because it wasn't just a matter of changing the tenses from he to I. The book had been dipping in and out of time, so I had to kind of piece it all together. It was like a jigsaw, and it was far more complicated than I ever thought it was going to be. And so it necessitated a great deal of new writing. And I think I wrote another 8,000 words. So the book is now about 102,000 words long, and 8,000 additional words. And I was determined it wasn't going to interfere in the running of the company, which is absolutely crucial at that particular stage. So I was getting up most days at 3 o'clock. I was writing from 3 o'clock till 8 o'clock. And then later on the day, I was going back to the book in the late afternoon or the evening. And I was no one, I don't think, apart from my wife, I don't think anyone knew that I was rewriting this book. And I was determined, as I said, that it was not going to kind of interfere with the running of the company. And I don't think it did. In fact, I think that it helped to keep stress levels at bay. I was incredibly preoccupied every minute of the day. And it was, as you will know, Ciar, as an author yourself, um, it is like living with an obsession. I mean, during the day, I wasn't very communicative. I was communicative when I was on Zoom calls to all my colleagues at work, but then the rest of the day, I was just living the company and living my book, and I could barely speak to my wife for a couple of months. And but it is, as I say, it is rather like kind of living with an obsession. But anyway, I've got that out of the way. The book is now being edited, so I've got a little bit more time for relaxation and peace.
And I believe that you came up with quite an interesting way of choosing a title for the book. Can you tell us about that?
Choosing a title was, far more complicated than I ever thought. The original title of the book was "Let Me Down Gently," but my publisher, he didn't like that title. And so he was quite keen. In the prologue of the book, the protagonist, the narrator, Simon Roberts, he makes reference to, a famous quote by Gloucester in King Lear, "As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport." And Anthony was quite keen on the title of the book being "As Flies to Wanton Boys," but that was, too close to comfort, really, because the book, which is a psychological thriller triggered by the sexual abuse of a 6-year-old boy, so it's a rather dark story. It was far too near to the mark, so we decided against that. And then we considered, I think, something like 80 different titles. Many of the titles had already been used before, but there's no copyright law on book titles. But we did want to try and choose a title which had some kind of originality. And after a lot of discussion and debate, going backwards and forwards, we we had a short list of 5 titles. And then we sent these 5 titles out to 100 different people, 50 people in my company, which I chose at random, and another 50 people, people that I knew, family or friends. And we actually asked them to score how they reviewed the 5 different titles. And the title, Life Term, which is the title we've decided on for the book, emerged as the clear favourite. And as this was the title that both my publisher, Anthony Hurst, and I preferred, this is the title that we're going to go with.
And it's a great title. And having read the first few chapters, I would recommend people go and get a copy when it becomes available, which I think is next March. Is that right?
It's coming out next March, yes.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Well, back to your day job. We touched on live events, which have been a growing part of your business over the last few years, as you said, and have been severely impacted by COVID. And you haven't been able to hold them, as you said. So what have you been doing with events, and how do you see the future for them now?
Well, I think it's possibly worth noting here that there's been an incredible change around in the fortunes of events and publishing to some extent. A year or so ago, if you can go back to that distant past, which seems very much like an illusion at the moment, events were all the rage, and publishing, particularly print publishing, was considered positively antediluvian. But in our case, it's good old-fashioned print magazines, as well as some of our online offerings, which have come to the rescue of my company. And I think the pandemic has demonstrated that virtual events can be successful and they can be profitable. I don't think they will ever quite replace live events. I think human beings are sociable people, and live trade events have been proved to be a very good shop window for the buying and selling of goods and services. There'll be, in my view, a recovery in live events, but it's going to be very U-shaped and very gradual. And to answer your question, um, we're living in very confusing times. There is a distinct lack of clarity about the live events. And this is really the business of government. And what the government needs to do is to provide event organizers with much more clarity about when live events can be opened up again. And until that happens, we're all living in a complete and utter kind of muddle because there's no certainty, no clarity, no confidence about what we can do in the future. So, in the meantime, as far as we're concerned, and I suggest a lot of other events companies, we are focusing very much on terms of virtual and content-led events and awards. And a lot of those events and awards are being really, really successful. Again, if I can just give you one example, last week we staged the Gramophone Awards. I mean, Gramophone is an iconic uh, global brand for classical music, launched in 1923, which we're very fortunate to have in our company. Last week we staged a virtual awards ceremony. Normally it's a live event, and to all the glitterati in the kind of the classical music field, it was filmed at Glyndebourne, and it was a massive success. It's been viewed in the week that we've held the event. It's not too late to kind of view it now, but it's been viewed throughout the world by 317,000 people. And that event in itself has made us more money than any other kind of our live events. So that's just one of one
Fantastic.
example.
So, I mean, do you think that the way that you've had to make this very rapid shift to virtual events will affect how you plan live events in the future?
Yes, I think to a large extent it has. I think that's what's happened in the last few months is that we've developed considerable confidence, expertise, and experience in running smaller virtual events. And that kind of experience is going to kind of carry on into the future. And depressingly, I believe that even if there is a vaccine for this pandemic, I think the pandemic is probably going to be around in some shape or form, certainly for the rest of my life. And I think we've just got to get used to the fact that we're going to be living with this pandemic, this virus, for some time to come. And so I think we've got to focus on what we can do. And in our case, it will be holding a lot of smaller content-led events, live events, which we will juxtapose with doing, virtual and participatory kind of offerings. In my view, some of the massive global exhibitions may have to go, or they may go. I hope not, but I think if the reality is, if companies are not keen to travel, I think it's going to be hard for them to kind of recreate themselves, certainly in the immediate future. But I certainly believe there is a big market in content-led, smaller exhibitions and awards. And I don't think that anyone has yet found the right solution. I firmly believe that there will be a creative alternative which will incorporate the best of live events with the best of virtual events, and something will emerge as a winner. I think we're almost there, but we're not quite there yet.
Well, another area that you have had great success with and that you mentioned is the diversity of your portfolio. And that is partly because of your great success with acquiring titles. You've talked about Farmers Weekly. What are the do's and don'ts publishers should be aware of when bedding in a newly acquired title?
Well, first, if you don't mind me going back a few years and saying that 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we were a company, we were hardly kind of putting our face above the radar, but at that stage we were identified as a healthcare company. And many people thought that we should remain a healthcare company. That was the prevailing kind of orthodoxy of the time was just focus on what you know and don't go outside those tram lines. And I thought that that was sort of wrong, because if we were just focused on healthcare, we would be waiting for Godot for kind of healthcare kind of opportunities to arise. So I decided to kind of remove those shackles and to focus on really being opportunist about what we could acquire in any single kind of market. What I firmly believe is that we're in a relatively small kind of market. Our expertise is in publishing, and those skills, whether you're working in whatever form of publishing, whether that's consumer publishing or business marketing, whatever sector you're working in, many of those skills are transferable. It's not as if you're going in from publishing to farming or becoming a rocket scientist. So, the skills that we will acquire in publishing are transferable skills. So, what we decided to do was to be very kind of open-ended about what we were looking for. We wanted to go for opportunities, and where we felt there were um, magazines or brands which we could acquire at affordable prices, where we could offer value, then we decided to go for it, whatever markets they were in. And I believe that's been very kind of significant. When we're acquiring titles, in my view, what I always look for, I look for content. Content always is the most important thing in my book. Whether a magazine has the right content, or whether we can improve the content. And as I say, we don't look to making kind of cheap options. At every single stage, we try to improve and expand on the content. What is very important, I think, is to empower all the staff are transferring. We've been acquiring a lot of magazines, brands from larger companies, and to some extent, those magazines have been in the kind of departure lounges of these, bigger companies. They've been siloed off, and when we have taken them on, sometimes the staff are a bit demoralized because they knew they were going to be sold. So the first thing we have to do is reassure the staff, to try and empower them, to trust them, to take an interest in what they're all about. We try normally we actually ask all our teams when we're acquiring a magazine or a brand, we go through a similar kind of format. We get them all to write a mission statement, because often what we find is some of the editorial staff and the sales staff are not always on the same platform. But above everything else, these are very simple mission statements, and they don't really necessarily mean all that much. But what they do is they give ownership to the teams. And we follow that up by going for away days, and we get the teams to present. We actually divide them all up into small groups, but they're not just talking shops. At the end of the day, we come up with a definite action plan, and we follow up that action plan by making certain that all the action points are followed up. Another thing I think about acquiring something is that it's very important, if you're acquiring a magazine or a brand, you have a very distinct plan. And we tend to do things very quickly, because the longer you leave it, the harder it is to develop that plan. because sometimes the longer you leave it, the more resistance you're likely to have. So it's best to, in my view, to strike while the iron is hot and to go for it.
And most of your titles, is it fair to say, are B2B titles with some B2C titles in the portfolio? How do you see the revenue mix for B2B publishers evolving over the next few years, and will subscriptions play an increasing role?
Yeah, a very good question, Kier. Again, as I think I've said before, the pandemic has highlighted the fact that, in my view, and I'm a keen advocate of it, print publishing is far from dead. And if anything, the virus has reinforced the importance of print as well as digital publishing. Of course, we've got to move into, all of us have moved into digital publishing. So it's a mixture of both print and digital publishing, as well as events, which is going to be, a crucial part of our kind of portfolio. Your subscriptions are a very big part of what we do. Some of our leading brands, Gramophone, Farmers Weekly, Dental Update, and Community Care. Community Care is a online only brand. They've all been very kind of buoyant in terms of their subscriptions. And subscriptions in our company account for 26% of all our revenues. And this revenue stream will continue to go up. Um, Advertising is a rather debased word with a lot of people. I'm a strong believer that advertising, particularly in niche markets, and particularly advertising where there are creative marketing solutions, has still got a major part to play in future. So we shouldn't write that off. But subscriptions has always been a key part since I ever started up the company in 1985. I converted one title, one of the two titles that I bought in a management buyout in 1985. I converted that from a free magazine into a subscription-only title. So subscriptions, paid for content, is always something that I've always believed in. I think as publishers, we've got to do a much better job in selling the real value of content-led, subscription-orientated magazines. I mean, it always is extraordinary to me if you think of all the work that goes into producing a magazine, whether that's digital or in print. But all the magazine, if you take, say, a print magazine, all the writing, the commissioning, the editing, the printing, the marketing, the distribution, and that's just in one single issue. So every single article is different in a magazine. And then you consider a B2D magazine that contributes so much to an individual or a company's growth, their profitability, and we vastly underprice magazines. Now, one analogy I always I'm keen to go. I love going into restaurants and having a meal. If I go into a restaurant with a colleague or my wife, whoever it is, and have a nice bottle of wine, a meal for two will cost not less than £100, probably sometimes a great deal more than that. The meal will last you 2 hours. It might not always be a very good meal, and the meal is lasts 2 hours, and you forget about it. A magazine, you have all the different complexity of a magazine, and you have that 10, 12, 24 issues a year, whatever it is, all the different ideas that you have of it. And we sell magazines, £100, £120, the cost of a meal which lasts 2 hours. It doesn't make sense to me. But, we all need to actually try and sell why magazines, whether they are print magazines or online versions, why they are so important, particularly in this age when the pandemic has actually flattened all our lives, and provoked a great deal of anxiety. Why magazines are so tremendously important for us, and we've got to do a much better job, all of us, in trying to promote their value.
That's a really good point. And it might be a difficult question to answer at the moment because we are still in the middle of everything. But what do you see as the main challenges and opportunities facing the B2B sector at the moment?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is to stay vibrant and alive in a really highly changing and competitive world where good and honest journalism, the type of journalism which I was led to believe was important, is greatly under attack, with fake news and all that involves. Everyone these days believes that they can be a journalist or a publisher. So we're facing all kind of these threats coming at all directions. But I believe that if you have got a good market-leading brand, and we're lucky to have some really good, sort of strong market-leading brands, there are many ways in which you can leverage your offering. Whether going into conferences, awards, training. Training is an area that certainly I think my company should concentrate even more on, and trying to get the content right. So I think there's a great future still for us in publishing. It's under attack. It's not an easy business to be in, but to paraphrase, I think it was Mark Twain. I think we should be singing from the rafters, and the reports of our deaths are greatly exaggerated. I think the next year or so are going to be very, very tough for all of us in the media. There's going to be an absolutely unemployment bloodbath. I have got nothing but total kind of empathy and concern for a number of journalists and people in publishing who are going to lose jobs and who are going to find it very, very hard to find alternative work. My heart really does uh, go out to all of them. And a number of small publishing companies are going to go to the wall. But publishing is a very dynamic industry. And there is a lot of very inventive and dynamic people that are attracted to our industry. And so there will be new magazines which will arrive, new ways of doing business, and a new way of connecting with our customers. So I think that although there's going to be one or two very, very tough years in publishing, I believe that if you still got the confidence and you've got the resolve and you look after your staff, and that's a crucial factor, try to look after the staff you have. I believe you can still be successful and can still be profitable.
And what about your own company, Mark Allen Group? You've grown rapidly over the last 10 years. What are your future growth plans? Do you think that will be achieved organically, or do you have any further acquisitions in mind?
Well, I think as far as my company is concerned, we're only halfway up the mountain. We've got a very long way to go. I think we're always restless. We're very ambitious to do even better. When I set up the company in 1985, I always knew it's never going to be a sprint race. It wasn't for me to set up the company, to sell it off in a couple of years and then to move on to something else. I wanted to develop a company that I could be proud of and our teams could be proud of. So we've, over the last 10 years or so, we've focused mainly on acquisitions. I think we've acquired something like 26 magazines, brands, companies in the last 10 years or so. I think in the next year or so, we won't be acquiring very much. We will be focusing much more on organic growth, but we will return to acquisitions again. We need to bed down a little bit. We've got one or two kind of new possible launches in the pipeline. So I think next year that we will be launching a number of different business magazines. So we're going to go back to launching again. We still believe there is a lot of mileage in launching, both print and online magazines, and we will, focus on organic growth in the next year or so. We're very ambitious for the company. As I said, our turnover This year, 2020 has been 50 million. We want to grow the company in the next 5 years to around 85 million. It's not just about growth, it's about making certain that we deliver a great service to all our customers, both in traditional publishing, online, and innovative ways of trying to capture our market. And as I must repeat, we've got a really amazing team that works in my company. We need to ensure that they're properly looked after.
So finally, outside of work, what do you do to relax? Are there any plans for a follow-up novel, for example?
Relax. Very good question. Well, I like reading. I'm a great walker. I go for a walk most days. I cycle a little bit. I play the saxophone, the tenor saxophone. I'm a big jazz fan. Playing the saxophone, I do that very, very badly. I've got a family with 4 children and 7 grandchildren. So my family, my grandchildren, they're very important to me. So I would like to believe that outside work, I have got a hinterland and, lots of interests. And I'm, always kind of thinking of new things to do. And I think I've got other books on the horizon. Once I've got this book out of the way, I will be focusing on trying to write something else. I'd like to write a book of poetry. I've got poems that I'd like to publish, and probably I've got another idea for a novel. So perhaps a less gloomy one. So I tend to kind of spend my twilight years trying to do 1 or 2 other creative things if I can.
Mark Allen, thank you very much for being our guest on the In Publishing podcast.
Thank you very much indeed, Ciar. Really enjoyed it.
A big thank you again to Acorn Web Offset for sponsoring this podcast. If you're looking for a new magazine printer, then check out their website at acornweb.co.uk or contact Matt Carey on 07714 299 105 or by email at matthew.carey@acornweb.co.uk. Thank you to Mark for being our guest this week. You can find out more about Mark Allen Group at markallengroup.com. Mark's novel, Life Term, will be published in the spring by Colenso Books. There is a 20% discount on pre-orders received before the 15th of March. For more information, please email customercare@markallengroup.com. Thank you for listening, and please join me next week on the In Publishing podcast.